Damn, it's a lot of light.
Yeah,
Much light.
it's good.
Whoa.
Exactly, massive seat.
God, I get lost in this seat. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey guys, so welcome to the first panel of Staking Summit. What comes after points and essentially how to attract liquidity through incentives. I think it's fair to say that a year ago, or just over a year ago, points were not really a thing. There was various point systems that were live, but they were attracting maybe tens of thousands of Ether. Fast forward a year, and we've literally had tens of billions of dollars be attracted to protocols through restaking, L2s, stablecoins using points. So we're going to discuss how that happened, what points mean for the ecosystem, and then potentially where we move forward from here. Before I do that, though, it'd be good to get a quick introduction, like 30 seconds each, from the panelists. So, João, do you want to start?
For sure. So I represent InceptionLRT, and we are a full omni-chain LRT protocol. And currently we are building also a Meta LRT product where in one click you can restake in multiple infrastructures such as Eigenlayer, Symbiotic, Futurely, Karak, and Babylon too.
I'm David Walsh. I work with Alluvial, lead sales and BD there. Alluvial is a development team working on the Liquid Collective protocol, an LST on Ethereum with a bit more of a compliance focus and posture. We have integrations across 13 qualified custodians and exchanges right now, and working very closely with a lot of asset managers, high net worth individuals, treasuries, and so on.
Morning, Thibault here from Bifrost. I lead strategy in the foundation. We are a dedicated liquid staking L1, leveraging off the Polkadot SDK substrate.
Awesome, thanks guys. I suppose introduction on my side. So Jordan Sutcliffe, BD lead at Symbiotic. Symbiotic is a restaking shared security framework with the goal of making decentralization the foundation for everything that's built upon in this space. So yeah, let's kick things off. As I mentioned, a year ago, we were talking tens of thousands of Ether, now we're talking tens of billions of dollars. Like, I guess my first question here is like, what changed? Why did points suddenly become something which was the main tool that is almost like the default now for attracting capital in the space? Like, was it just a change in sentiment? Was it just market sentiment? Or yeah, what do you guys view on what caused this shift?
I think up front there was the ICO craze, right, which was great for raising capital. After the ICO phase came airdrops, which was also an amazing way to kind of bootstrap ecosystems. You saw the likes of Uni being very successful there. Anyone that used the protocol in the last year gets 400 Uni. And then there's kind of long-term strategic alignment between the user and the protocol. I think one of the main drivers really was regulation. I think there was a gray area between what you can actually give to users and, you know, I think that's where kind of the points programs came from. Being able to kind of bring in capital, give people kind of incentives, maybe over the longer term. And I think it's been clearly pretty successful to date. I think Blast was one of the first ones to kind of go live with a points campaign a year or so ago. Launched kind of incentivizing specific behaviors, which was quite nice. And then kind of grew TVL from there. So I guess where airdrops were a bit more retroactive, yeah, points campaigns were a bit more proactive. You can incentivize users to take specific actions, deposit ETH onto the bridge, and obviously that was quite successful for a lot of these protocols to date. So it's been interesting to see how it's played out, and it will be interesting to see how it goes in the future too, especially with more regulatory clarity, with how the election played out in the US. Hopefully we see that coming pretty shortly.
Yeah, from our side, is also about the airdrop strategies a lot, and like to really incentivize communities, incentivize the user, and give way more control to the user to what to do, what type of like integrations they want to see, what type of gamifications they want to see, and how that plays along, like especially before TG, right? So that for us, that's really the big game plan, especially for points.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, I think overall it's just another way that we've tried to get out of a boredom, you know, the boredom we've sort of experienced in the bear market. I think technically speaking, it's just another evolution in our quest of issuing tokens in one way or another. So more, I would say, I would definitely, you know, confirm that there is this idea of incentivizing user behavior and so forth, building, you know, boosting communities and so forth. But realistically, points, I think the idea there was simply that there was no exogenous capital, right? We just had to find a way to sort of re-experiment in one way or another and find a way to sort of incentivize these use cases. So essentially, I think now that sort of the market has changed, recently, and we are seeing sort of capital coming in, we'll have to sort of see then if that sort of continues. But essentially speaking, I think if you look at use cases or you look at what's happened in the past, I don't think there have been very few successful points programs, in my opinion.
Okay, now, unplanned question. Talk of the ones that were successful, and which ones do you not think were successful? Like what, and maybe what caused them not to be successful? Because I think there's a difference between like points programs. So the question is like, what are points programs for? Attracting capital. I think you could argue that many have been successful, but then are you referring to when the token comes along, you still have the same dynamics where there's the sell pressure and what have you? So like, do the tokens actually fix anything? Is that kind of
I think the main problem is essentially people are going out there doing points program which lasts super long. They're really long, right? There's no timeline in regards to, okay, when is this ending? So people are getting frustrated. There's a lack of transparency around potentially how you're giving these points away. And essentially, I mean, I think you're better off having, I'll just give an example. I think Athena, for example, is a very good example. They said, look, we have a hard cap on TVL. We want to reach this amount of TVL. We're doing it in 3 months. And boom, like the airdrop was done. I think the main issue, though, realistically, is that these tokens come out and they have absolutely no utility, right? So you're launching a token, and what are you expecting to do with that token? So if you don't have a use case or something to do with that token from like, the airdrop or when TG happens, then essentially people are going to be forced to just sell, in my opinion. So I think it really is around that. It's around the use cases and the utility of the token that is being issued as well.
Makes sense. I think something that's quite apparent is back in DeFi summer, protocols were having to issue tokens. Like they were actually having to provide like a real calculatable yield to users. Now it feels like there's a bit of a power dynamic shift. So users were in control there. It was the protocols that were almost giving up their treasury to, and the users were the ones saying we need X yield. Now it feels like the power has kind of shifted on the protocol side, where there's a lot of like it's pretty opaque actually what the yield the users are getting. The protocols are the ones that can control how many points they issue, how long the points run for, how much they dilute these points, and ultimately at the end of the day, like how much they are worth then in tokens. So like, how can we just like, how do you guys think about this power shift? Maybe as protocols yourself, like, do you guys have a responsibility for like transparency for users? And like, how come do you think now stakers and capitalists is very happy to accept points versus actually a hard yield? Like, what's changed there?
Well, for us, like it's definitely the transparency is something that we are, of course, we take it very seriously since day one, right? So everything about our points program, every aspect of it and every detail is on our documentation. You can literally like see everything, and we also keep a very open conversation with our community. So we have a very, very active Discord community on Inception, and actually like even before we launch anything, like we really talk with our community and ask them like, how do you want to see things, And I would say that, as you said, because a lot of this power is within the protocol itself, we are really responsible for making sure that all our information is really transparent and really resonates with what the user and what the client really wants to see, right? So, yeah, for sure.
And just, David, coming to you quickly, on the institutional side, like, what's their opinion on points? What's their opinion on incentives in general? Not just points, just incentives in general, because these are the guys that are the most provide the most scrutiny to our ecosystem. And so yeah, kind of keen to hear, and obviously other panelists as well who have the institutional touch points. Like, how are you seeing the difference in appetite across the user base?
Yeah, I guess it depends on how you define institution, right? So like just the more crypto native risk on institution, you could call it, looking at like liquidity providers,
like the Wintermutes of the world.
Maybe more like a Maven or like MEV Capital, for example, or Maven 11 or one of these that are providing liquidity and managing risk. And I think like they're probably looking at hurdle rates of 10% to 25% or a bit more. Then you have on the other side of the spectrum, you have like the traditional asset managers of the world. I think for the hurdle rates to get them to 10% or 25%, I think like points and liquidities and incentives really, really matters to them. I think on the other side, I think those participants look at it as more of like a cherry on the top. So I think from their perspective, they want to see like does this product meet the requirements from a compliance perspective? Does it make sense from a security perspective? And then I think long-term strategic alignment in terms of having the incentives and having long-term ownership in a protocol as well is important, but definitely not the driving factor, at least based off our conversations. I think it's just a nice to have.
Got it. And what about your thoughts on, so the DeFi protocols that have been around for coming up to several years now, do you feel they are disadvantaged given that maybe their FDVs are nowhere near what some of the newer protocols are? Like, how can they compete and retain capital? Do you reckon they should be worried? Or is capital sticky enough that they shouldn't be too concerned? You know, it's a bit of a fad for this cycle that points are a thing. But to your point, Thibault, that even when the point cycle's over, the tokens are issued, everything kind of realigns itself, and the market kind of reaches, you know, almost equilibrium. Like, how do you think about how the older protocols can compete with the new?
Yeah, I think the market is a pretty good reflection of the truth, right? So you're looking at a lot of these L2s as an example, who have been really hot during their points campaign. You're seeing crazy, TVL figures of $1 billion plus. And today, if you go out on L2 beats, you'll see that they're under 100 mil. So I think essentially things correct. I definitely think that the old protocols don't have to worry too much because they do have product market fit. I think there are going to be L2s out there which are going to be successful with their points program because they are tackling a specific use cases or a specific segmentation. So they're already clear in terms of their product market fit in that sense. But I think overall, the old DeFi protocols, I don't particularly think they're threatened in what way whatsoever. I mean, once the artificial incentives sort of run out, people will go where there is use cases, there are yields which are sustainable, and these DeFi protocols have tested themselves throughout the market conditions and so forth. So I think there's a bit of that as well, yeah.
It's also about credibility, right? So if you maintain your credibility towards your users, towards your user base, you continue to have that liquidity. So
I think you need to have totally different value props as well, like be differentiated in a lot of ways. Yeah. I think you see a lot of protocols that are basically copied and pastes and a little bit of a rebranding. 100%. I think if you have like a clear differentiator, that makes like a lot of sense for sure. And I think from a capital being sticky perspective, it's clearly not, I think. Like if you look at a lot of the LSTs or the LRTs, like capital, as soon as the incentives dries up, the capital moves. And maybe like from a farming perspective, it's a bit mercenary in lots of ways for the more risk-on participants. You just get the incentives and basically leave. So it will be interesting to see how it all plays out. I think you just really need to have a differentiated product, though, to exist long-term. And I think there's a lot of these leaders that are out there, the likes of the Aves of the world, the Lidos, that have done an amazing job at building great products, and they will have long-term users because they're differentiated.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Okay, so I guess this kind of brings me on to one of the topics here was, I wanted to ask you guys about base. Maybe David, we can start with you, given the alignment there. Like all this talk about points and incentives, but probably one of the most successful protocols in terms of bootstrapping liquidity and TVL this year has been base. So, and just to be clear, that there are no incentives there. Is it because people expect an airdrop, or is it because they just have a fantastic product that has a fantastic onboarding ramp? Like, what are your guys' thoughts on base? And I was about to say MetaMask as well, but MetaMask is a bit of an OG. Like, they were very new. The whole ecosystem was very new then. So yeah, focusing on base, when there are plenty of other L2s out there now, like, what was the secret sauce there?
I think it helps when you have 8 million active monthly users, probably with Coinbase, right? But I think Base is definitely taking a little bit of a different approach, being a bit more compliance focused. So you see a lot of these protocols that have done extremely well, the likes of Moonwell. I know for a fact Coinbase are working on a couple of other more compliance focused products too, and I think that fits well within the Coinbase ecosystem. They have the USDCs of the world. Coinbase is obviously the largest regulated exchange in the US, but I definitely think it helps when you have those kind of active users that you can move and migrate. And then from a user's perspective, there's incentive enough, like on the commercial side, the opportunity side, that they probably don't necessarily need an airdrop to actually move over and migrate. But I think the onboarding and that's as seamless as it is right now, I think that's probably the driving factor.
Yeah, I mean, we work with Base as well. And I mean, I guess essentially the main point here is really distribution, right? I think we've realized, and we've just spoken about, there a number of applications which are just being forked out and pushed out on different ecosystems and so forth. I think what Base have done quite well is they know they've got the distribution, they've got the users, and then they're able to sort of open up that private system now to, to an open system where builders can come in and understand the value prop of having users from day one, really. I think also essentially what they've done is they've also tried to focus on other things which are not, DeFi, degen plays, right? They've focused on DIDs and games and other types of use cases, Blackbird, sort of the card, incentive systems in restaurants and so forth. So they try to really open up and broaden out to different verticals. So yeah, I think that's been really an exciting angle.
It makes sense. So you mentioned Athena earlier, Thibault. I also agree that their point system was probably one of the best structured I've seen, and I think the reason for that was because of the clarity they gave users early on. But are there any other protocols, again, not just points, just incentives in general, and maybe how you guys are thinking for your individual protocols? And maybe, David, we can touch upon you after this, because I think you're in a bit of a unique position where you're a little bit handicapped, so to speak, on what you can do. And that's, but like, for the more DeFi native platforms, like what features of liquidity incentives in general do you guys like? And then maybe how are you trying to tie those into your own solutions, basically?
Yeah, so I mean, firstly, Bifrost, we've been in the market for 5 years now. So we are, specifically doing liquid staking. So I think in terms of product market fit, there's obviously naturally a demand for that. So I think what we've done now, given that, our protocol is generating revenue, we're able to sort of find a sustainable way to sort of, take those incentives, from the protocol's revenue and then redistribute them for specific behaviors. So I think that's key first. I think going to like other examples of successful ones, I think, as you mentioned, the transparency and sort of the time duration is key. I think there are projects out there still doing points program after 12 months. I mean, I don't really know what's going on there. So I think essentially it's about having some clarity around the points, the time frame, but also I think you need to explore as well different things. I think as another example, I think Contango, right? We're doing sort of on-chain leverage, different sort of DeFi composable plays. They've done something quite interesting where they've got the sort of the traditional points program, but then you have basically this option where you can sort of strike this option and you can get the token at a discount. So they're trying to play around with this idea of you're getting a token afterwards, but there is a discount angle to it as well. So you're not sold, you're not pushing it to be sold immediately. I think Infinex, have been really interesting in terms of how they've tried to do sort of this ICO idea with points, sort of gamifying yield around these points idea, making it more equitable, and people having then that opportunity to then buy into that NFT, which then sort of gives you an allocation to the tokens on different vesting schedules. So I think we're sort of seeing more iterations of sort of points and all that. But yeah, coming back to Bifrost, I think the idea is around sustainable incentives and sort of pushing that to clear use cases where there is a sort of a track record regarding where users are actually using the product.
Yeah, from our side, I agree 100% with what you said. It's about transparency, about the users, and about on-chain actions. So you are really bringing your community and really being transparent regarding that. And one thing that we also do is, for example, when you do like a lot of you help the protocol with the social tasks and everything, you also get rewards, and all that will eventually lead up to the airdrops and all that. So like all this transparency and keeping the community close is something that we are really, really working towards on, and we will work every day so we can make our users very happy.
Well, that makes sense. And just going back to this point, David, so maybe you want to give a little bit of a better, maybe you want to outline kind of your position as a protocol and maybe why you haven't been able to do this, incentives in general, and do you feel like you're disadvantaged? Like what is your plan to compete when there is effectively a lot of yield being thrown around by your peers?
Yeah, it's been challenging. I guess that's that gray area I was talking about earlier. Like there was no regulatory clarity in terms of points or incentives to users. I think it's definitely been a challenge, I would say, in terms of like competing with other liquid staking protocols that are giving out incentives left, right, and center. But I think we've had good natural growth. I think we're up to around 110,000 Ethereum in terms of TVL right now without incentives. And we've got a bit more comfortable from a regulatory perspective in terms of incentives. So we will be launching a couple of integrations towards the end of this year, which will be super exciting. And then we will have incentives coming very, very shortly. So nothing to announce right now, a bit of alpha, I guess. But if there's anyone that wants to talk and discuss, feel free feel free to come and chat. But yeah, incentives soon, TM.
Nice, that's cool. Thibault, you touched on something, you mentioned the sustainability word. I think this is a really key piece to mention because if you look at DeFi, probably 95 or more % is, in terms of incentives, is probably unsustainable right now. How do you think we get to the point, other than just scaling massively, like how do you think we can get to that point where incentives are sustainable? And like specifically as a liquid staking protocol, like the revenues are not great. Like let's be clear, like staking is a very commoditized business. The yields aren't great. So like, do you think we can ever get to a point where we can be sustainable, or do you feel like there's just always going to be a new protocol that is willing to be very aggressive with their emissions, and the capital, there's always a flight risk there, that capital is going to migrate away from the system because it's very hard to create a sustainable yield from protocol fee distribution or something like that? Like, say, how are you guys thinking about that, and more long term?
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. I think, well, you look at the Aves, right? I mean, they've been there for a while, and we're seeing sort of clear traction there. Not necessarily in terms of the price of the token, but in terms of like the way they've managed to basically deploy on other networks and sort of their traction there. So I think I always come back to the usage, right? So I think that's key. You're right. I mean, protocol revenue is obviously not significant, but everything you can be strategic with that sort of capital. And I think that's where we're trying to be in that front. I think distribution is also one thing which we find is very key as well. It is one thing to have a competitive yield, but I think if you're able to then make the right integrations as well into the distribution channels, that also facilitates certain things. So yeah, I would definitely say that those are sort of my key points there in that respect.
The key is also innovation. Like if you continue to innovate, like you avoid all this selling pressure after, and you keep afloat. So you need to keep innovating, keep integrating, keep building new things. So otherwise, the new protocols with more aggressive FTVs and new investors and everything will just take you over. So I think innovation is key in the end of the day.
How are you guys thinking about it, Jordan? I feel like we're missing an opportunity here.
Yeah, well, one of the things that's like Symbiotic is, and the reason why we're working with like the Athenas of the world is that native token utility is one of the hardest things to provide, right? If you can't provide a strong yield for your native token that can justify people holding it in isolation, then you need to provide the utility for that token. And like historically, it's been providing liquidity for the token, which usually does rely on more token emissions to kind of fund that liquidity. So historically, it's been very unsustainable. On the restaking side, though, what we're kind of looking to do is to enable protocols that have like centralized parts of their stack. So we'll use Athena as an example. They rely heavily on cross-chain bridging and messaging for the distribution of their tokens cross-chain. And so what we're doing with them is we're allowing them to use the ENA token, to secure a decentralized node network that's providing those bridging and messaging. So it's a really nice way for projects to kind of get utility for their native token. It's a bit of a supply sink for that token, so it helps the project as well, whilst also kind of securing the ecosystem, their tech stack. So yeah, that's kind of, the Symbiotic protocol itself is a bit different. Like we're that infrastructure provider that we're kind of facilitating or providing the tools for these users to kind of, to do that. So I guess kind of what we've, at least kind of concluding and wrapping up a little bit here, we're kind of saying that points have given protocols a bit more power, but at the end of the day, it's still the same thing as just issuing tokens. You still need to have, a sustainable plan in place. And at the end of the day, what is key is getting your project up, like bootstrapped, that initial maybe year or two where you have those incentives, getting your protocol bootstrapped to be on Aave and be able to have so Lido's a good example here where STETH, the leverage staking of STETH is kind of a solid $1 or $2 million ether that is just kind of locked in Lido now, because to unleverage that is going to be a mammoth task. It probably won't happen. So getting up to speed that bootstrapping period is super key. So do you think moving forward then, like if you could look into a crystal ball, like how do you think things change? Like do you think there will always be just a new incentives program called something different, whether it's points, whether it's whatever, shards, however you want to call it? Like is there always just going to be this new hot sector that issues an incentive mechanism, but at the end of the day, it's always just going to boil down to what is the core product? Like how do you guys see protocols approaching incentives in the years to come?
I think from my perspective, I think the underlying product is definitely the key motivator for users for using the product. I'm actually super interested to see how these public sale projects go. Like I know Echo.xyz is doing amazing work. I know Legion is a project we've been looking into. So in terms of like regulatory clarity, I think we should get some more pretty soon in the US. And I think like probably a reversion back to public sales is another interesting way. I think like the points, that will always be there. Yeah. I think airdrops is another strategy, and I think public sales will be a third, and I think it will be up to the protocol to just decide how they want to basically seed that initial liquidity.
Yeah, no, I think points definitely will stay. I think we have to find some sort of a sustainable way to do so. I think the transparency behind it is key, as you've mentioned. I also think that, I mean, we're going to continue it. I mean, there's going to be so many more iterations of these different sort of points meta, right? There's, as you were saying, there's the public and private markets, there's the ICOs, there's obviously the play to earns or whatever as well to getting coins as well. So I mean, there's always going to be some sort of gamified or fun way to sort of distribute that. I still think that fundamentally the issue is that these tokens that are going to be issued essentially are going to have some sort of utility from day one. Otherwise, I mean, we're just going to keep on going having these same issues there. So yeah, I think what has to happen is points have to be sort of clear in terms of like, you know, how they're distributed, and then also potentially the token itself has to also have utility from the start. I think that's the key point.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and you also have like Wells Market now that you can change your points. So you have gamification, and for the user is also an extra layer for them to just trade and just go on more protocols, have more points, trade them between them. So I guess that you just keep, like, there is a constant evolution, right? So if you continue to evolve and like make more usage for these points and for these extra airdrop strategies, new tokens and everything, like you will always have something to do and incentivize more and more and loop infinitely, you know? So that's what people want, these loops, especially in the LRTs, right?
Right. So it sounds like points are here to stay. Sorry, guys. But it also sounds like the protocols that are going to remain for years to come are the ones that have that core product. And it doesn't matter how much you throw points, how much you throw incentives at things, you still need to have that core. So fundamentals do matter. And so I guess last quick question, I'm conscious we're running out of time. Like, how do you guys think about in this last cycle specifically, like altcoins in general, or like DeFi protocol native tokens have really struggled. Like, there's been a real shift towards, at least in my opinion, more fundamentals of what the native token offers. Like the best performing tokens, like the makers, Aves, they're probably the very few protocols that have true revenue. So do you see that continuing? Maybe again, David, on the institutional side, like, I guess your clients care a lot more about the fundamentals, like you said, the real yield that can actually be taken from these tokens rather than just emissions and inflationary tokenomics. Would that be a fair comment? Yeah, for sure. I think that's definitely going to be the approach going forward, and it'll be interesting to see how the ecosystem in general, like all of the other L1s, how that plays out, where the consolidation happens long term. I think there's obviously been a migration from ETH into Solana, and I think that's a little bit driven by the price action. It'll be interesting to see if that kind of extends out to the long tail of assets, or it kind of concentrates back in towards Ethereum if there was improved price action at some point. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But yeah, I think it's definitely fair.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
And I think it's healthy for the ecosystem, right? Like, we can't just keep bootstrapping this ecosystem forever. We actually have to provide real value. And I think it's definitely healthy that whilst there's a lot of froth in the market and there can be a lot of fluff around the outside, if the market does always revert to those core fundamentals, then I think that's a really key piece that can all give us hope that we're going to be still in jobs in the next 10 years. So within that, to quickly like to wrap up, hope the talk was informative, and quick round of applause for the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much.